Thank you. If I'd known I was actually following Maggie, I probably would have stayed on the M1. So it's from the you're going from the sublime to the ridiculous. I'm going to start by taking my shoes off because I'm too tall for this. I'm completely non-PC. I'm completely out there. My children were sexually abused while I was the deputy head at a school, and their head teacher did that dastardly deed. As a result, and I had a nervous breakdown, I was suicidal, I established Enough Abuse UK. My frustration, I so meet Maggie full on, I sing off the same hymn sheet. If anybody is sat here today and thinks a child is a file on your desk, would you please leave? You are responsible for a child's life. It's not a file, it's not an it. I've even heard it referred to as an it. And it's not. And I haven't got a clue what's happened to my slides. Can you move my slides on, please?
There you go.
Thank you. Is that me? No. What am I doing? That's me. Okay. Okay then, this is what I've been asked to speak on today. I don't pretend to be a paediatrician or a psychiatrist, but I have made it my business over the years to understand, as a deputy head, I was always very angry at basically education systems, because I think in some respect it's like sausage meat arriving on your doorstep. We stick them through a process, they have to come out the other side looking like a grade A sausage, and there's no space for the chipolata or the cocktail sausage. And we all have to go along with that. And I think, funnily enough, it lets boys down somehow more than girls. But I'm moving on from that. So the impact of mental abuse, mental health, following on from Maggie, funnily enough, this is UNICEF's statement by the United Nations to advocate for the protection of children's rights, to meet their basic needs, to expand their opportunities to reach their full potential. Their basic need is to be loved. They have a right to be loved. They have a right to be heard. They have a right to be cared for. And as adults, it is our duty, whether we like it or not, to actually see that through. Or our position in childcare, we should be working in some other organisation. I love this man. He's absolutely right. Nelson Mandela, education is the most important weapon, powerful weapon we can use to change the world. No policy, no report system, no inquiry is going to prevent child sexual abuse or any form of abuse. It's a piece of paper. And I feel, and I'm very radical on this and I'm very out there, we are always trying to attack it from the top, never from underneath. We never want to dig deep. What are the root causes in our kids today? You know, I had a loving childhood, thank God. You know, we raised £1 million, didn't we, for a burnt-out dog's home the other day. I adore animals, I actually prefer them to human beings. But not a penny for researching therapy for those poor children from Rotherham who are let down by our society, or Rochdale, and there'll be Blackpool, and there'll be, you name it, they'll be there, all over the country. And this is a classless, globalist crime. It's cultureless, it's rife. And I am meeting the bishops at the House of Lords today. If you saw me on the front times of the Sunday Times on Sunday, I am so adamant that someone needs to put a foot down and say what is happening in our society. And Archbishop Justin Welby rightly said, abuse is rampant, and good for him, that takes courage. And I'm meeting the bishops today to move forward on how we can actually manage this within the church and within our organisation. 90,000 children in care at any one time. This is 2014. The majority enter care due to abuse and neglect. Well, there's a surprise. And NSPCC tell you 45% of them suffer from a mental diagnosis, and some adult has done that to them. 1 in 5 children are reported as suffering depression, we heard about 4 or 5 months ago. Well, that's amazing. And I'm not very good at maths. I've got 2 actuarial sons, and I have no idea where they got the skill from, but not from their mother, because my skill was music. But 1 in 5 are also reporting having been abused. There's the link. It's not surely coincidence. 1 in 5 adults report having been abused in one way or another, sexually abused. You're sat in this room here, and so strong is abuse in this country. We all know a child who's being abused. We all know someone who's been abused. They're in this room. And we all know someone who's doing it. That's the fact. That's the reality. If you don't believe me, just work a day in my office. This is terrible. 1 in 9 children who need support are only getting it 2014. Shocking. 43, this is from Action for Children. I met them 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was on another government event there. 43% of social workers and 36% of nursery teachers feel frustrated and powerless to help. And we hold our heads up high and say we're a great nation. We are not doing enough for our children. We should be disgraced by what we're not doing. Children in care generally have poorer outcomes than the wider generation. Well, that's not a surprise. This applies to the achievement. You know, 91% of poor school achievement is put down to abuse. 91%. I wonder why that would be. It applies particularly to relation, academic achievement, homelessness, and mental health. Well, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, abuse damages the developing brain. That's a reality. So you can tell I used to be deputy head of a primary school. I've got a ball of Play-Doh here. So this little baby is born like this. I never do 2 events the same. They all come out different, so I'll probably go off slide. So here's this lovely baby. Now then, I told you I'm very out there. I'm not politically correct. If you have a heart condition or you have a nervous disposition, please either breathe deeply or leave, because I am about to say something that you will hear every day in the high street, but I want you to welcome you into my world when I was stood in Morrison's the other day. Now, I wasn't going to dare say this with the great and good being here today, but I'm going to. Who cares, because this is reality. You fucking little bleeders! You fucking little sod, I'll fucking kill you when I get you home! What the fuck do you think you're doing now? And no one moved. And yeah, we shouldn't smack children, but should we be allowed to swear at them like that? So here's this little child. You fucking little... What's that done to its head? What's that done on a daily, hourly basis? If you're doing that in public, what are you doing at home? And we wonder why children have got poor outcomes. Why they can't concentrate at school. Oh, now here's the thing. You know, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and 3 o'clock the bell's going to go. I couldn't give a monkey's about the conjugated verb to be in French. I couldn't give a stuff about 2 and 2 or Pythagoras' theorem, because in an hour from now I'm going to be locked in a cupboard, beaten senseless and raped by my father. Funnily enough, I'm not interested in education. But is anybody interested in them? The number of abused people that say to me, nobody asked me why I was unhappy. Nobody asked me why I was poorly behaved. Nobody asked me why I was lonely. Well, thank you, adults. You know, then we have a thing about, I've got here a Coca-Cola bottle now, let's use this. 80% of young offenders have been abused as children. Did you know that? Who knew it? Well, majority didn't. 80% of young offenders. What is their main emotion? Anger. Okay, fine. Let's try this now. If I came now and shut you in a dark room, didn't feed you for 2 days, would you feel annoyed? Yeah. If I now put my hand right up your inside leg now and touched your parts, how would you feel? If I smacked you right in the face now, how would you feel? If I told you you were an effing git, what would you feel like? Okay, fine. If I take the lid off that, what's going to happen? And we wonder why kids are angry. We wonder why they're angry. And then, of course, we wonder why they don't tell us. Let's have a bit of a laugh today. Anybody here a virgin? Because if you are, please go and get a life. But I'm going to ask you now, let's just break the ice completely. Why don't people tell? Well, I would like you now to discuss with your next door neighbour your most intimate, fun part of your sexual experience that you've ever had now. You have 30 seconds. I mean, I would start, but, you know, I feel quite vulnerable up here. No one's done it. Anyone had a threesome? No? Okay, fine. So, why don't people tell? You tell me why you won't tell me. Why won't you tell me? Pardon? Embarrassed, yes. Now, here's the thing. How much worse for the child? You're dirty. You won't be believed. you'll be put in care. Your mother's arms are going to drop off. Mummy's going to die. You'll break up the family. How does a 2-year-old tell you that doesn't even have the language skills? You know, abuse is not always what people think. I've had grown men phone me at 45, 50 years of age, not really knowing whether they'd been abused or not. Because it's not always what we think. The abuser doesn't walk around with a beacon on its head. I don't know if my husband abuses children. I hope he doesn't. But he's not going to tell me, is he? You have to use your gut feel, your gut instincts, and you have to make a note and report it and do something with it and grow a spine. This is what actually happens. It imbalances the chemicals in the brain. I'm going to look now again. Funny little visual aids. But, you know, you will assume what you will assume about children. You will assume that there's those boxes there have matches in them. You'd actually be right. But I don't know, behind your eyes today, what sort of morning you've had, what sort of home life you have, even what sort of job you do, unless I read your label. We don't know. Now I'm going to be really simplistic here. I suggest inside this box of matches is somebody who's had a loving, pretty much straightforward upbringing, good school, and yeah, probably a few little bruises along the way, but pretty much it's going to go out and fulfill its potential, yeah? I know, you know, bear in mind, I was deputy head of a primary school. This is what goes on behind the eyes of the abused. That brokenness. Now, we have trauma therapists, expert trauma therapists that work with us. I had a therapist this year, first time in 12 years. I've had 6 counsellors, all of whom I ended up counselling, because nobody understood what it was like to have be the mother of 3 sexually abused children when you missed it. Because funnily enough, in the scheme of things, it wasn't on my bucket list, wrap them up and give them to a paedophile. You know, there's only one thing worse, and that's if your child dies. But the life I knew did die. The life I knew was brutally ripped away overnight. And I have to live with that every day of my life that I missed it. And yet I had the training courses that were set out there. All about procedures, processes. Good Lord, that helped, didn't it? Now, the trauma therapists we work with, we have gentlemen that specifically work on male rape and male sexual abuse, a forgotten gender, I do honestly believe. Man up with the expectations we have on our boys. Boys don't cry. Yes, they do. Man up. Don't be a wimp. Why? You know, we're putting our agenda on these lads, and they're not allowed to express themselves and be the people they were born to be. Boys are different. That's it. We're different. But if we put all those matches, if some trauma therapists came along, and ours are pretty good, I can tell you, they are expert at sexual abuse trauma and domestic abuse trauma. If you put all those matches up the right way, you still can't mend the splintered ones. You still can't replace the head of something that's already being burnt. That damage is permanent to some extent. So all these children that you've got as looked after children, troublesome children, what are their issues? And Maggie is absolutely right. Do you ask? Can you be bothered? Does it require too much work? Is there just one more report you've got to put your name to? I'm stuck. It won't move. It won't move. No, it won't move. It won't move. I will carry on.
No, hang on, excuse me.
I'll carry on. So, sexual abuse. Let's take that one. He goes everywhere with me, IT man. Sexual abuse actually is very often a mask. Neglect, rather, is often a mask for what is... yeah. No.
I'm just trying to go back.
Whoa.
There.
God. No, that's not right. Sorry. Oh, that's it. There we go. Okay. So it causes abnormality in the brains, but the neglect is often a mask for other forms of abuse. It's easier to put neglect against the child's name than put something else, perhaps. But, you know, if I don't want somebody to wash my body, maybe it's because somebody's inappropriately touched it. Maybe that's why I'm a bit grubby. 91% poor school achievement. We've just been down that route. 80% of young offenders suffer from childhood abuse. 86% of abused children suffer from delayed language development. These are all clues for teachers. We're not talking about estuary English. Oh, bleed now, mate. No, we're talking about stammers. The clue here is development. Language development. Because while all this is going on, the frontal lobal system of my brain is damaged. Well, what a surprise. I'm not made of iron. Prick me, I bleed. Look at this. 12 times more likely people that have been sexually abused as children, 12 times more likely to commit suicide, and 1 in 10 actually succeed. And yet, oh golly, sorry, blimey, sorry, hidden neglect, sorry. A child needs 33% of its waking time with its permanent guardian to feel secure. And in that time, it has to be quality time, absolutely quality time. This is the brain on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. The right-hand side of the brain is what the child is born with, and the left-hand side doesn't come online until it's about 9 months old. So it's very important when people talk about their past to get the left-hand brain to enmesh and be supported and make it balanced with the right-hand side. But babies are only right-hand brained until they're about 9 months old. At 18 months, the left, they communicate with each other. The child is walking, talking, but of course, if it's had all this going on, it's got issues. It develops at 2 years old, it develops guilt and shame. Whoops-a-daisy, I shouldn't have done that, I feel guilty. But what about the toxic shame put on you by adults? You know, you're not worth it. You're a little shit. You're stupid. What about that sort of shame? I feel I am bad. And here we have this, I don't know if you know this, but very, very quiet children who are, like very, very quiet children, can be victims of domestic abuse. So we have fight, flight, freeze, flop, and friend. So when I shouted at you, you probably went like that. You could have walked out the room. You could have smacked me in the face. A baby can't do that. So a baby in a cot that hears all this domestic abuse going on and all sorts of stuff going on, it freezes. It just can't move. And then the flop is, just do it to me anyway. You're going to rape me anyway, just do it. And then the friend, well, if I'm nice to you, you probably won't. If I'm kind, if I'm nice to you, I'm always amazed when I was teaching actually at the number of children that were in difficult situations that were very ingratiating to their parents and those that were abusing them, hoping that, you know, if I'm nice to them, they'll be okay. How do you recover? Well, of course, the trouble is, in an animal, if an animal is frightened, it is pushed into a corner, it very quickly recovers. Its cortisol levels and its adrenaline are sort of in kilter and they come back. We don't. We need, our cortisol spikes. If as a child you're not comforted and your cortisol spikes, children who are badly abused end up with smaller brains because the cortisol eats away at the decent brain cells. That's what they're left with. And we wonder why we've got children in difficulty. That is what's happening to them. The cortisol spikes. It's a dangerous enzyme, chemical. You know, ADHD now. There are now evidences coming through that ADHD, sometimes dyslexia, can be caused by, again, the harm, the trauma from their abuse. I have a book here. Sorry, I don't feel I've been on for half an hour. This is a book called Who Says I'm an Addict? Does anybody deal with children dealing with addiction, self-harming? I'd strongly suggest you read this book. David Smallwood was abused by his father. He runs a therapy clinic in Harley Street. I know him. And he talks about the limbic system in the brain. We are all sensitive to different things. I'm a very sensitive person, so I feel pain very deeply. I feel joy very highly. And it's very difficult for people like us because we can walk in somebody else's shoes and we do absorb their pain. And it's difficult. And then what do we do with it? My first husband was abusive. He told me not to be so stupid. Bloody well grow up. You know, some people I could slap them around the face, they'll punch me back. And other people, the person who scratched them and their life is falling apart. And when that pain happens, they do get into self-harming. They do get into addictions. They do get into eating disorders. Does anybody ask? Is anybody bothered? The number of children that get very involved in PE when they're anorexic. There's another clue if there's any PE teachers in the room. because it keeps them slim. They're very clever at hiding it. We heard this, attachment, the need for stable attachment for long-term support. If we've got all these kids in care that are bounced from foster carer to foster carer, if we actually let them have a stable base for a couple of years and good trauma therapy, 1 hour a week, you can turn these children around and reshape the brain and get the chemical balance better. They don't have to be damaged all their life. Some of it, of course, there will be. You saw the matches, but not completely. And in so doing, this is a new thing that's neuroplasticity. The potential the brain has to reorganize itself by creating new neural pathways. Our brains are changing all the time. I think sometimes I'm sort of brain dead, you know, dinosaur, but you know, that's what happens. All the time, your brain is changing its balance and its shape. And we can do this with our youngsters if we actually bothered to give their time to that rather than rate another policy. And I'm ending now. And these books, I strongly recommend this book. It's a very easy read. And it's very sad, actually. It's also very funny. And The Emotional Life of Your Brain is another interesting one for you to read. And I'm sorry if I've rushed it. I thought I was going to have a coffee before I stood up here. So I don't know if there's any questions. I'm not an academic. I say I'm a mum who's been there. And my passion is, if you don't recognise grooming, my big passion is sexual abuse of children. If you don't recognise grooming, you will not prevent abuse. That's where it is. That's absolutely where it is. You try and open the doors to a school and have that sort of training. It's the elephant in the room. Everybody wants to learn how to cross the road, ride a bike, don't take drugs, don't smoke, blah, blah, blah. But if you have this happen in your life, you're heading for a train crash. That's the trouble. And it's basic health and safety. Do I breastfeed? Do I bottle feed? Who will look after my child when I go back to work? But too many people go, whoa, oh, it didn't happen in my school. Well, it already has. They're already sat on the assembly floor in every school in this country every morning, regardless of independent or state.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.